You checked it this morning, before coffee, before breakfast, before you even fully woke up. The same routine you have done hundreds of mornings now. You pressed your finger to the Lancet, watched the meter count down, and then felt that familiar sinking feeling when the number appeared. You went to bed careful. You ate well yesterday. You did what you were supposed to do, and the number still said something you did not want to see. That feeling, that quiet collapse of effort that happens in the first 30 seconds of your day, is what this video is about. I'm going to walk you through 3 specific ingredients, taken at a specific time, that target the exact biological process responsible for that number. We count down from ingredient 3 to ingredient 1, and ingredient 1 is the one that addresses the mechanism most people with elevated morning blood sugar have never been told about. Stay with me. Let me describe the mornings before. There was a version of your morning that was different from this one. Maybe 5 years ago, maybe 10. You got up, and the day started simply. No meter, no number, no mental calculation of what you ate versus what the reading might be. You had energy that felt connected to the amount of sleep you got, not energy that had to be coaxed into existence with coffee and the slow erosion of morning fog. Your body woke up the way it was supposed to wake up, cleanly, ready. Now there is a different kind of morning, the kind where the glucose meter is already in your mind before your alarm goes off. You lie there in the dark for a few seconds, running backward through yesterday. What you ate, when you ate, whether you walked, whether you slept well or poorly, trying to predict what the number will say before you see it, as if you could prepare yourself for it, as if the anticipation softened the landing when the number is too high. And sometimes it is too high, even when everything was right. That is the part that breaks people over time. Not the mornings when they know they made a mistake. The mornings when they cannot find a mistake, when they did everything they were told, followed every instruction, avoided every food on the list, and the number still disappoints. Those mornings produce a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. They make people feel like their body is working against them through no fault of their own, which, in a very specific and correctable way, it is. You are not imagining it, and it is not your fault. The reason those mornings happen, the reason your glucose can rise overnight without a single bite of food, is biological, specific, and more addressable than you have probably been led to believe. And that reason begins not in your diet, but in what your liver is doing while you sleep. Here is the question I want you to hold through this entire video. Something that surprised me when I first fully understood it, and that I have used to reframe how I counsel patients on this specific problem. Your blood glucose number in the morning is not primarily a reflection of what you ate yesterday. For many people managing elevated blood sugar, it is primarily a reflection of what your liver did between midnight and sunrise. If that is true, and I am going to show you the research that confirms it is, then every habit you have built around what you eat during the day, while important, is addressing only part of the problem. The overnight half of the equation has been sitting there, unaddressed for years. And that is why the numbers have been stubbornly resistant. There is something that can address the overnight half. 3 specific ingredients, taken 30 to 60 minutes before bed, that give your body's overnight glucose regulation systems exactly what they need to work more precisely. Not a medication, not a supplement marketed as a cure. Specific plant compounds with documented mechanisms, taken at the specific time when those mechanisms are most relevant. Why don't more doctors mention this combination? That question has an answer, and the answer will come before we are done. My name is Dr. Jane. I have spent more than 30 years working with patients whose central struggle was this. Their numbers did not respond the way they should have to the efforts they were making, and nobody had ever explained to them why, at the level that actually mattered. In those 30 years, I have learned to divide blood sugar management into 2 separate conversations. The daytime conversation, which is the only one most people ever have, what you eat, how much you move, how your medication is working. And the overnight conversation, which is the one most people never have, what your liver is releasing into your blood while you sleep, what your hormones are doing in the pre-dawn hours, how your cells are responding to insulin when you wake up. The 3 ingredients I am going to describe today belong to the overnight conversation. They are not magic. They are not a replacement for the daytime work you are already doing. What they are is a targeted, evidence-supported way to give your body's overnight systems a better environment to operate in during the 6 to 8 hours when the most important glucose regulatory work of your day is quietly happening without your awareness. By the time this video ends, you will understand the overnight biology you were never taught. You will understand which 3 plant compounds directly support that biology and why their timing matters as much as their chemistry. And you will have a simple, specific, affordable evening habit you can begin tonight. Before we dive in, if you're finding this useful, take 2 seconds right now, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a video, and give this a thumbs up. It genuinely helps more people like you find this content. And drop a comment below, tell me what country you're watching from. I'd love to know where our community is tuning in from around the world. Hold on a second. Before we go any further, I've put something together for you. It's called the Glucose Paradox. It's a free guide on blood sugar and diabetes, and you can grab it for free through the link in the description. I'm telling you this now because I want you to finish this video with a concrete tool in your hands. To get it right away, just click the link in the description, head over to my site, and drop your email. You'll receive the guide in your inbox a few minutes later. But I don't want to take up any more of your time. Let's get back to the video. Before I give you ingredient 3, I want to tell you about Sandra. Sandra was 67 years old, a retired nurse from Phoenix, Arizona. She had spent her career on the other side of this conversation, counseling patients about diabetes management, explaining blood sugar to other people, helping others track their numbers. When she came to see me, there was a specific kind of frustration on her face that I recognize in people who know enough to know that what they are experiencing should not be happening. She had been managing type 2 diabetes for 6 years. Her medication was appropriate. Her diet, by any clinical standard, was excellent. She had spent 40 years as a healthcare professional, and she knew exactly what to eat and what to avoid. Her daytime numbers were consistently good, but her fasting morning glucose, the first reading of every day, ran 15 to 30 points higher than her physician considered acceptable. Every single morning, she had tried adjusting her dinner timing. She had tried earlier meals, lighter meals, no meals after a certain hour. She had tried different combinations of her medication. And still, every morning, that number was too high for someone who was doing everything right. When I asked her what she knew about hepatic glucose overproduction, about what the liver specifically does overnight in people with insulin resistance, she paused. Then she said something that stayed with me. She said, "In 40 years of nursing, I don't think anyone ever explained that to me. A nurse, 40 years of healthcare, never told the most important thing about why her own morning number was high. I told her what I am about to tell you. Let me explain what is happening in your body between midnight and 6 in the morning, because this is the biology that everything else in this video is built on. Think of your liver as a fuel storage and release system, like a reserve generator that kicks in when the main power supply is interrupted. During the day when you eat, your liver receives glucose from the bloodstream and converts it into a stored form called glycogen, packing it away for later. At night, when you stop eating and blood sugar begins to fall, the liver's job is to release small, carefully measured amounts of that stored glycogen back into your blood, keeping your brain and vital organs fueled through the sleeping hours without letting glucose rise too high. When the liver is well regulated and insulin signaling is working properly, this is an elegant and precise system. The liver receives feedback signals that tell it exactly how much glucose is already in the blood, and it calibrates its releases accordingly. The overnight glucose level stays stable and appropriate. You wake up with a clean, controlled number. In people with insulin resistance, the condition that underlies type 2 diabetes, that feedback loop breaks down. The liver's ability to read the signals that should tell it to stop releasing glucose becomes impaired. Instead of precise, controlled releases, the liver overshoots. It keeps pushing glucose into the bloodstream, even when blood sugar is already elevated, because the signal that should say enough has gone quiet. This is called hepatic glucose overproduction, and it is one of the primary drivers of elevated fasting morning blood sugar in people with type 2 diabetes. Not what you ate for dinner, not a failure of discipline, The liver making a regulatory error, an error that is driven by metabolic inflammation and oxidative stress in the liver cells themselves. Understanding this changes the entire framework, because it means that the battle for your morning number is not fought at the dinner table. It is fought in the overnight signaling environment inside your liver, and specific plant compounds can directly support the conditions that allow that signaling to work more accurately. That's the part nobody tells you. Let me keep going. There is a second overnight process that compounds the liver problem, and it has a name that most people have never heard, even though it affects millions of them: the dawn phenomenon. Imagine that in the hours before you wake up, typically between 3 and 8 in the morning, your body begins its biological preparation for the day. It releases a surge of hormones: cortisol, growth hormone, glucagon. These hormones are designed to mobilize energy to get your brain and muscles ready for waking activity. One of the ways they do this is by signaling the liver to release glucose into the bloodstream as morning fuel. In a person without insulin resistance, the pancreas responds to this glucose surge by releasing additional insulin, and blood sugar stays within a healthy range. In a person with insulin resistance, the insulin response is either insufficient or too slow. By the time adequate insulin is released, blood sugar has already climbed, before the person has opened their eyes, before the first cup of coffee, before a single bite of food has entered their body. This is why you can go to bed with a reasonable number and wake up with one that is significantly higher. The dawn phenomenon happened in the dark, quietly, driven by hormones doing exactly what they were designed to do in a body that no longer has quite enough insulin response to meet their challenge. This is not a character flaw, it is physiology, and knowing about it means you can work with it rather than against it. Now, you might be thinking, if this is happening in my liver and in my hormones while I'm asleep, what can I possibly do about it from a glass of something I drink before bed? That is exactly the right question, and the answer lies in something I mentioned briefly: the signaling environment your body takes into the night. The liver's glucose overproduction is driven by oxidative stress and metabolic inflammation in liver cells. The dawn phenomenon is worsened when cortisol is elevated going into sleep. Both of those conditions are directly influenced by what you consume in the hour before you close your eyes. Certain plant compounds, taken at the right time, reduce oxidative stress in the liver, improve the sensitivity of the cellular feedback signals that tell the liver when to stop releasing glucose, dampen the cortisol environment that will drive the pre-dawn surge, and improve the responsiveness of your cells to insulin when morning comes. 3 specific compounds, 1 warm drink, 30 to 60 minutes before bed. That is the protocol. Here are the ingredients. Ingredient 3 is turmeric, and specifically its active compound curcumin. You have probably heard of turmeric. It has been in the public health conversation for years, and it has a reputation that is sometimes deserved and sometimes overstated. For blood sugar specifically, what matters is curcumin's effect on a specific type of inflammation that most people never connect to their morning glucose reading. Think of your cell's insulin receptors like deadbolt locks on a door. When the lock is clean and well-oiled, a key turns it easily. When it is sticky, corroded, gummed up with residue, you need to force the key harder, and the door opens reluctantly. The residue that makes insulin receptors sticky and unresponsive is chronic low-grade inflammation, specifically the activation of a signaling molecule called NF-κB, which is one of the primary triggers of the inflammatory cascades that drive insulin resistance. Curcumin directly inhibits NF-κB activation. When that inflammatory signaling decreases, insulin receptors in your cells begin functioning more effectively. The key turns more easily. Glucose has an easier path from the bloodstream into the cells where it belongs. Curcumin also has a direct protective effect on the beta cells of your pancreas, the cells responsible for producing insulin. Chronic high blood sugar and chronic inflammation gradually damage these cells over time, reducing their capacity to produce adequate insulin. Curcumin's antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties offer documented protection to pancreatic tissue, slowing the progression of beta cell decline that makes insulin resistance progressively harder to manage. Here is the practical note that makes or breaks this ingredient. Curcumin on its own is absorbed poorly by the digestive system. A large portion passes through without ever entering the bloodstream. A compound in black pepper called piperine increases curcumin absorption dramatically, by some measurements by up to 2,000%. A small pinch of black pepper alongside turmeric is not optional. It is the difference between a pleasant yellow powder in your drink and a bioactive compound reaching your liver, your pancreas, and your insulin-sensitive tissues. Always include the black pepper. That is ingredient 3. Ingredient 2 is Ceylon cinnamon. And I need to make a distinction here that most people never hear, because the cinnamon you almost certainly have in your kitchen is probably the wrong kind for this purpose. Most cinnamon sold in grocery stores in the United States is cassia cinnamon, the common variety from China and Vietnam. In culinary amounts, it is fine, but cassia contains a compound called coumarin, and when consumed daily over time in meaningful quantities, coumarin can place stress on the liver. For a nightly habit taken every day, this matters. The cinnamon that research consistently identifies as having the strongest and safest metabolic effects is Ceylon cinnamon from Sri Lanka, sometimes labeled as true cinnamon. The label will say Ceylon. It is more expensive, less common, but available in specialty stores, health food stores, and online with minimal effort. It is the variety worth seeking out. Ceylon cinnamon contains a family of polyphenols, plant compounds that do something remarkable. They appear to act on the body in a way that partially mimics insulin, stimulating your cells to absorb glucose even when insulin signaling itself is running below full efficiency. Not replacing insulin, supplementing it, contributing an additional independent signal that helps glucose move out of the bloodstream and into the cells. Ceylon cinnamon also slows the rate at which your stomach empties after a meal, the same gastric emptying effect we discussed in the context of other blood sugar strategies. When food moves more slowly from the stomach into the small intestine, carbohydrates are absorbed more gradually, glucose enters the bloodstream in a steadier stream rather than a flood, and the post-meal spike is lower and flatter. A lower, flatter evening glucose curve means less residual glucose circulating when you go to sleep, less for the liver to manage overnight, less for the dawn phenomenon to push higher, and the morning number reflects all of that. The dose is modest. Half a teaspoon per evening is sufficient to produce meaningful metabolic effects with consistent use over weeks. More is not better here. Consistency is better. That is ingredient 2. Now we are at the exact midpoint of this countdown, and I want to bring back the question from the beginning. Why is your morning number high, even when you did everything right yesterday? You now have most of the biological answer: hepatic glucose overproduction, the dawn phenomenon, and the inflammatory environment that drives both. 2 ingredients down, 1 to go. And ingredient 1 is the one that surprised me most when I first seriously studied the research. The one that works on the liver's overnight signaling direct and through more pathways simultaneously than anything else on this list. But first, I need to tell you about Robert. Robert was 72 years old, a retired engineer from Columbus, Ohio. Precise, systematic, the kind of man who approached his diabetes management the way he had approached every technical problem in his career, with documentation, analysis, and a determination to find what was not working and fix it. He had been tracking his fasting glucose every morning for 4 years. He had a spreadsheet. He could show you the data from any week, could tell you his average, his range, his best and worst months. He had read extensively about diabetes management. He had tried multiple dietary approaches. He had adjusted his evening meal timing in every configuration he could think of. His numbers had a pattern, not chaos, a pattern. Every morning, regardless of the evening before, his fasting glucose ran between 20 and 30 points above target, predictably, consistently, like a thermostat set to the wrong temperature. When I explained the concept of hepatic glucose overproduction to Robert, walked him through the liver's overnight role, the feedback loop that breaks down in insulin resistance, the oxidative stress that impairs the liver's ability to read the stop signal, he listened the way engineers listen, quietly processing, cross-referencing. Then he said, "So my liver is essentially miscalibrated, and you're telling me that what I take before bed can recalibrate it?" "That's a reasonable way to think about it," I said. He asked for the mechanism. I gave him ingredient 1, and here it is. Ingredient 1 is moringa, specifically the leaf powder of the Moringa oleifera tree, one of the most nutritionally dense plants known to research and one of the most studied for metabolic health in clinical populations that most Western practitioners have simply never been introduced to. Moringa has been used in traditional medicine across South Asia, Africa, and Latin America for centuries. What modern research has done is identify the specific compounds responsible for its metabolic effects and document the mechanisms through which they work. There are 3 of them that are directly relevant to the overnight glucose problem. The first mechanism involves a compound in moringa called chlorogenic acid, the same compound found in high concentrations in green coffee beans and studied extensively for its glucose effects. Chlorogenic acid inhibits specific enzymes in the gut that break down complex carbohydrates into glucose. When those enzymes work more slowly, carbohydrates from your last meal of the day are digested more gradually. Glucose enters your bloodstream more slowly and in lower concentrations, and the evening glucose curve is flatter and more manageable going into sleep. The second mechanism involves compounds called isothiocyanates, which improve insulin sensitivity at the cellular level by influencing the internal pathways cells use to respond to insulin signals. These are different pathways from the ones curcumin targets, complementary, not redundant. Moringa and turmeric work on insulin sensitivity through different molecular entry points, which is part of why taking them together produces effects that exceed what either produces alone. The third mechanism is the one most relevant to the morning number specifically, and the one that brings us back to Robert's insight about liver recalibration. Moringa contains a significant concentration of antioxidant compounds that directly reduce oxidative stress in liver cells. The oxidative stress that impairs the liver's feedback signaling drives hepatic glucose overproduction. When oxidative damage in the liver is reduced, the cells regain some of their capacity to accurately read the signals that tell them when to stop releasing glucose. The liver's overnight regulation becomes more precise, less overproduction, lower morning number. 3 mechanisms simultaneously: slower carbohydrate absorption, improved cellular insulin response, better liver signaling overnight. This is why moringa earns the top position on this list, not as a supporting player, as the compound that targets the specific overnight biology that determines your morning reading. A study published in the Journal of Food Science and Human Wellness examined moringa supplementation in people with type 2 diabetes and found meaningful improvements in fasting glucose levels with consistent use over several weeks. What participants and their physicians often noted was not dramatic change on any single morning, it was a pattern shift. The mornings stopped varying wildly. The unexplained high readings became less frequent. The range narrowed. Morning after morning, the number became more predictable, more manageable, closer to target. That predictability, that narrowing of the range, is what Robert described when he came back in after 6 weeks of the nightly protocol. He brought his spreadsheet. He showed me the trend. His average fasting glucose had dropped by 18 points. His range had narrowed by more than half. The pattern that had been fixed for 4 years had shifted. He looked at the graph for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, "It's recalibrating. Now let me give you the complete practical protocol, because the method matters as much as the ingredients. In a cup of warm water, or an herbal tea if you prefer, combine 1 teaspoon of moringa leaf powder, half a teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon, with the label specifically saying Ceylon, a small pinch of turmeric powder, and a small pinch of black pepper. Stir everything thoroughly and drink it warm, 30 to 60 minutes before you go to sleep. That is the entire preparation. 4 ingredients, 1 cup, 10 minutes of your evening, every night. Why this timing? Because your body follows a biological clock, circadian rhythms that govern when specific organs and systems are most active and most responsive. Your liver begins adjusting its overnight glucose output in the hours before you sleep. Your pancreas recalibrates during the transition to sleep. Your cells shift toward their overnight insulin response patterns. When you take these 3 compounds during that transition window, they are present exactly when the processes they support are being set in motion, not after the fact, not during the day when the overnight regulation is already complete, but in the window when it is actively being configured. This is the principle of chronobiology applied to nutrition. The same compounds consumed at different times of day produce different effects. Timing matters. Alongside the evening drink, there is one additional habit that compounds the benefit in a way that costs nothing and takes 15 minutes. A gentle walk after dinner, not exercise, just movement, activates a specific mechanism in your muscles called non-insulin-mediated glucose uptake. When muscles are actively contracting, they absorb glucose from the bloodstream directly, without requiring insulin to trigger that absorption. This is a completely separate pathway from the insulin-dependent system that is impaired in diabetes. Your muscles don't need insulin's help when they're moving. They take glucose in on their own. A 10 to 15-minute walk within an hour of finishing dinner can meaningfully lower your post-meal glucose peak. A lower evening glucose peak means less residual glucose entering the night, less for the liver to manage, less for the dawn phenomenon to amplify. The morning number reflects all of it. The walk lowers the starting point. The drink supports the overnight regulation. Together they create a compounding effect that neither produces alone. There is a dimension of this that I want to address directly, because it is one I think gets underestimated in clinical conversations about blood sugar. You might be thinking, I've tried things before. Supplements, routines, protocols. They work for a few weeks and then the results fade, or they never materialize in the first place. Why should this be different? The honest answer is, this is not different in the sense that it requires something you have not been asked to give before. It requires consistency over 30 days. Not dramatic change, not restriction, not suffering. One warm drink every evening before bed. That is all. But here is what is different. This protocol targets a biological mechanism, overnight liver function, that most other approaches never address. You have been working on the daytime half of the equation for years. The morning number has been stubbornly high because the overnight half has been running unassisted. This addresses the overnight half, not as a miracle, as targeted, consistent, evidence-supported metabolic support applied at the right time. People who see real results with this are the people who track their morning number every day, write it down, and look at the trend at 30 days. Not at individual mornings. Individual mornings vary for reasons that have nothing to do with the protocol. Stress, sleep quality, hydration, the previous day's activity. The trend is what matters. And in my clinical experience, the trend over 30 days of consistent evening use tells a clear story. One more practical note. If you are on medication for blood sugar, metformin, insulin, or other diabetes drugs, do not adjust your medication without speaking to your physician. These are food-based compounds, but their consistent use can contribute to lower blood sugar. If your medication is also lowering blood sugar, your doctor may want to monitor your numbers more closely in the first few weeks to ensure things don't fall too low. That conversation takes 5 minutes, and it is worth having. Before I bring this home, I want to come back to Sandra. Sandra, the retired nurse from Phoenix, who had spent 40 years in healthcare and had never been told about hepatic glucose overproduction. The woman whose morning numbers were 15 to 30 points too high every day despite excellent daytime management. She started the nightly protocol the week after our conversation. 3 ingredients, 1 cup, 30 minutes before bed, every evening. She also added the post-dinner walk, 20 minutes through her neighborhood, slow enough to be pleasant, consistent enough to matter. At 30 days, she sent me a message. She had been tracking her morning number every day. The first week had been variable. She told me she almost stopped checking daily because the fluctuations were discouraging, but she held to 30 days the way I asked. At 30 days, she reviewed the trend. Her morning average had dropped by 22 points. The range had narrowed from a 40-point spread to a 15-point spread. The unexplained high mornings, the ones that happened despite everything being right the day before, had stopped occurring. She wrote, "I've been trying to fix this number for 6 years, and I just needed to address what my body was doing at night." Think back to how you felt when you pressed play on this video. The sinking feeling of the morning number, the exhaustion of trying everything right and still not seeing the results it should produce, the quiet wondering whether anything would actually move this in a meaningful direction. Here is what you know now that you did not know then. You know that your morning fasting glucose is primarily a reflection of what your liver does between midnight and sunrise, not primarily what you ate yesterday. You know about hepatic glucose overproduction and the feedback loop that breaks down in insulin resistance, driving your liver to release too much glucose overnight regardless of your daytime efforts. You know about the dawn phenomenon and the pre-dawn hormonal surge that pushes blood sugar higher before you open your eyes. You know about the 3 plant compounds, moringa, Ceylon cinnamon, and turmeric with black pepper, that target these overnight processes directly through complementary mechanisms when taken in the 30 to 60 minutes before sleep. And you have the complete protocol: 1 teaspoon of moringa, half a teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon, a pinch of turmeric, a pinch of black pepper, in warm water or herbal tea, every evening before bed. A 15-minute walk after dinner. Morning glucose tracked daily, evaluated as a trend at 30 days. Sandra wrote, "I just needed to address what my body was doing at night. After 6 years of trying, the overnight half of your blood sugar equation has been waiting to be addressed. Tonight is a reasonable time to begin. Take good care of yourself. You have earned it. And hey, if you made it all the way here, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Hit the like button to let me know this was worth your time. And leave a comment below. Tell me what country you're watching from. Seriously, I read every single one, and it means a lot to see how far this community reaches. You know what the problem is with diabetes and high blood sugar? Most people find out way too late, and by the time they do, they have no idea where to even start. That's why I decided to create a free guide. It's called The Glucose Paradox, and inside you'll find everything you wish you'd known sooner. I'll explain how blood sugar actually works, and why your body sometimes reacts the exact opposite way you'd expect. That's why it's called a paradox. I've also included concrete habits you can start changing right now, even if you know zero about nutrition or medicine. It's free. You can download it in a second, and it might be the single most useful thing you do for your health today. Just click the link in the description to head to the site, drop your email, and get the guide sent straight to you. Don't put this off.